I've been really excited for this series for quite some time, and it feels a little unique because it's been several weeks since I've taught. We've had Brandon taught last week. We had a conversation with Ted Tanzi, kind of did like a summary thing a few weeks ago. So I'm excited to jump into this series, a series that we're calling The Journey Inward. And today marks the start of that 14-week series. And our series defining text comes from a letter from Paul to the church in Ephesus. It's a little letter in the New Testament, just several pages right of where we were in the Gospel of Matthew, called Ephesians. And you could probably, if you're interested in going home today and be like, I want to get the full context of this letter, you could probably read it in less than 30 minutes. But for the sake of saving you some time and framing this up today, really just giving a framework, an introduction to where we're headed over the next, well, really through the summer, here's my version of Paul's letter in 121 words. You ready? This is Paul in my voice. Hey, Jesus followers. This is my best Eugene Peterson. Hey, Jesus followers. You've heard the gospel story. You know the gospel story, this Jesus story, this story of his kingdom. You've responded to that story. Now, locate yourself in it. Overlap your story in it and find home there. And as you do it, you'll know who you really are. You'll discover your true self. You'll begin a journey of healing, and you will be transformed. And then from there, God will use you, not just as an individual, but as a part of his bigger family to transform your city and your world. And get ready, though. It's going to be hard, and the enemy doesn't want you to take these steps, so you better get geared up. Rely on each other. And again, just remember that in your journey of transformation, God will use you to help others and theirs. Grace and peace, your friend and pastor, Paul, formerly Saul, the guy that hated and murdered you. If you know his story, that was funny. So inside that letter is this like 3-verse pastoral prayer that Paul writes that is the launching pad. It's kind of the hinge that this whole series will arc on and off. And I'm going to read that starting in verse 3, verse 16, chapter 3. Paul says this. These are his words. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. How good is that? How good is that prayer? I want to share a story of something that happened to our family. I think it's been a while now. You ever have those things in life that you count on to be normal, and then when they're not, it's far more disruptive than you imagined it could be? One of those things all our homes have. It's called a toilet. So several months ago, I started noticing after flushing would occur, the flush began to get slower. It started to bubble. It'd have like these breaches of its contract, like this social contract held to us that was like, we use you, we hit the lever, and you do your part of this experience. It was starting to breach that contract more and more. It gurgled. It made animated noises at us, but yet, you get a plunger, things would do. I was like, you know what? Kids, one's potty trained now, toys, maybe there's just something happening. And as I do with all things that require hands-on fixing around the home, I see it, I think about it, and I just kick it down the road and often ignore it until it gets a crisis level. And so you can imagine what happened after several weeks of this gurgling. It is warning us. The toilet is telling us problems are coming. Problems are coming. And it happened after a particular event of one of our home members that the worst imaginable happened you can imagine. And it was a particular sort of thing that was yucky, like all the way. Up and out, gurgling, bubbling, noise, like you couldn't turn the tap off, not the tap, you couldn't turn the water off fast enough. It was filling and overflowing, and it's in the floor, and it's spreading, and there are kids. I think it happened on a Friday when she wasn't there, and I had both girls, and there's noises and screaming, and the whole thing happened. You imagine, you can picture it. Maybe you've been there before, so stop judging me. And so from there were 3 attempts to fix it. The first was with just a little snake from the surface. You know what I'm talking about when I say like a toilet snake? I went to town on that thing, and all I did was scratch the porcelain of my toilet so bad it has irreparable damage. But all of a sudden, the bubbling went down, the waters receded, and life went back to normal. And I was like, oh, must have got it. About a week later, it starts giving those warning signs again. And in my infinite wisdom, I continued to ignore them. And when the worst happened again, and it overflowed, and it got on the floor, and then children got involved again, and it was a problem. So this time I was like, I know what to do. I'm going to go to the clean out that's in the yard. I'm going to open the clean out and see if I can see if it's backed up that far. Well, if you know how water works, you know when there's a blockage in a system, and then you release an area, there's pressure behind it. And I think it's on video somewhere. And I'm standing over it because I'm a moron, not knowing that was about to happen. And I've got my head cranking, and then the fountain of life and limb and excrement came right there. And all of a sudden, everything blocked is just overflowing at my feet. And there's toilet paper, and there's fecal matter, and there is wipes that shouldn't have been in there. And it is just filling our yard and the area, and it stinks. And real life, we're okay. And so what do? I call someone. I call Jared. I'm like, Jared, you know someone, right? And he's like, yeah, I got a guy. So the guy comes over, and he gets one of the hardcore snakes, and he puts it in from right there and goes all the way to the sewer. And after an hour of just massaging the poo, it finally goes down. I'm like, yes, it's good. Put the cap back on, go back to life. Another 3-4 weeks. Hello, problems. Bubbles begin to emerge again. And then what do I do again? I don't get ahead of it. I wait for the crisis to happen. It overflows again. I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's a sewer problem. That's what I call the PPSD. And they come down, and they put a camera down that thing. And eventually, we find out that there's actually, a few months ago, Suddenlink repaired a line in our yard, and they had to bury a new cable. And just so happens, by the sovereignty and grace of God, in all the length of dirt that they could have gone, they perfectly pierced with a conduit our sewer line. And guess what? They were willing to come back and fix it, but it could have been anywhere from 10 to 200 days in their estimation. And so I did what anyone would do. I called Jared again. Jared, it's time to get to the root. So we began to dig up the yard. I dug, and then he got down in the matter and repaired the pipe, and everything happened. So we had to actually perform surgery at the source to get things flowing in a direction. This is taking much longer than I anticipated to tell this story. But here's the deal. Maybe you've been there. And here's the pattern that I practiced in that toilet situation. At first, I ignored the problem. Well, I ignored it a lot. Number 2, I tried to blindly and just wishfully treat the problem from the surface. Eventually, I had to see the problem for what it was, and I wasn't capable of doing that on my own. Then I had to actually dig up the yard, find the issue, cut it out, and put a new version of that thing in there. And 5, all along the journey, every time I relied on myself, I made bigger mistakes. But when I relied on someone else and experienced, solutions came. And here's my point in all of that. I believe that each of us has something or a set of things that is keeping us from the life that we long for. The thing that's deep down in us that manifests frustration or anxiety or broken relationships or unhealthy habits and relationships with ourselves and things is all a facade, it's all a front that is covering up or it's a misconception of the thing that we actually long for. And if you were to create a list for yourself of put a word or a concept in for the answer to that question, what defines the sort of life that you long for? One of the big things that would emerge is found in a word that's really a concept that I imagine would be near the top, and that is wholeness. Wholeness is got to be, and it is part of the sort of life that we long for in Jesus. Wholeness was recently partly summed up in the philosopher and modern cultural commentator Kelly Clarkson when she wrote about it, and she said things like, what doesn't kill you makes you. That's wholeness, my friends. Now let's sing it. What doesn't, just kidding. We'll define this idea more in the weeks to come. But quickly, let me go back to our text. In this prayer from Paul, we find kind of a nudge, just kind of a push towards a bigger vision for three things that will serve as key principles for navigating this journey inward this summer. And the first is a vision for introspection. Introspection. Paul says, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. A vision of wholeness includes the practice of introspection, in which we have to recognize that a life that we long for in Jesus must be alive to the dimensions of our interior worlds, all of it. Second, Paul offers a vision for wholeness. He goes on to say that, and I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. And right from the start, framing thought. There is no such thing for you and I as healing or wholeness or integration or the parts of our interior world being settled and lined up without the love of God. Those are two parallel tracks, an increased awareness and experience of God's love given to us and given back to him, and our journey of becoming more whole. And once we get past the surface through introspection, the journey of being rooted and established in love begins. And ultimately, that's the journey that heals us. And finally, it looks like this. The third principle, Paul offers kind of a nudge towards a vision for transformation. He goes on, he says, and to know this love. When he says to know is not here, it's like to experience it. To let it rewire you and change you from the inside out. And to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be what? Filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Even those cracks, even the breakages, even the gaps, that you may be filled to the measure of the fullness of God. And all that to say is that the invitation in front of us this summer is to get down to the root of some of our internal fractures with a knowledge of the divisions that exist around us, and then to participate wholeheartedly in our ongoing transformation one step at a time. And here's a fair warning. What I'm proposing for the next 14 weeks is not necessarily a quick fix solution. It's not a quick fix solution to all of your problems, but it's more of a long-term rootedness in Jesus that gives us a vision for how you can have greater depth and maturity as you engage your own internal issues and fractures in cooperation with the Spirit of God and Jesus, who was broken for you to bring you wholeness and healing. And from that place, we exist not for that just to be a journey inward for us, but that to be the catalyst for us to journey outward in community for the community, closing the gaps in us and around us for the sake of other people. This series will give shape and language to part of our church identity and ethos moving forward around the idea of practicing emotionally healthy spirituality. And in case that sort of language sounds to you like it doesn't belong in the church, let me tell you something. Let me tell you, mental health and emotional health, this is the new frontier of discipleship. This is the new frontier of spiritual formation. This is the new frontier of what it means to apprentice with Jesus. And we are committed to taking it seriously. And for you, and for your kids and for our community and for our community's kids, if we're going to love one another and if we're going to love our community, we have to gear up for this new frontier. And so today, I just want to offer up some framing thoughts about where we are headed into these principles for how to follow Jesus together in the next few months ahead. But first, let's name a few problems. Let's name some of the tensions in this. And I love the poet Langston Hughes. He wrote a poem called Tired. And in that poem, he says this. He says, I am so tired of waiting, aren't you? For the world to become good and beautiful and kind. Let us take a knife and cut the world in two and see what worms are eating at the rind. The author Rich Villodas commented on this poem, and he said that we exist in a world eating away at itself, a world fractured from within, a world aching for wholeness, whether the fractures are related to politics or race or religion or public health, just to name a few of the polarizing issues we feel daily. Our lives are not often marked by love and goodness and beauty and kindness, but by reactivity and impatience and judgmentalism and violence and just the inability to hold space with one another, end quote. We carry the stress of our fractured world in our bodies and in our relationships. The fractures within and around us don't feel right because our souls desire something deeper. We desire bonds of belonging and community. We were made in love and for love by a good and beautiful and kind God, but sadly, many of us feel stuck. And what makes things more complicated is that the internal feelings we experience and people we deeply care about experience, where they feel the feelings of stuckness, if that's a word, it doesn't always look like how it feels. Assuming we're paying attention enough to have knowledge of that, it often doesn't look like how it feels. Let me illustrate that this way. Are you all familiar with the story of Titanic? I imagine you are. You've probably heard even the iceberg metaphor for how what is visual is only 10% and everything underneath the surface. So hold that in your head in terms of where I'm going with this. But think about the moment that the Titanic first struck the iceberg. There was an immediate and dangerous divide. There was a disconnect with what was going on in the lower decks from what was going on in the upper decks. The lower engine rooms and the storage areas, at least how James Cameron portrayed it to us, the lower engine rooms and the storage areas were immediately in chaos. They were flooding. Instantly, the ship was actually doomed. It was sinking, but not everyone knew it. And interestingly, catch this, there was a window of time, albeit fairly small, there was a window of time where the chaos of the lower decks had no influence on the life and the comfort and the dining and the entertainment on the upper decks. There's socioeconomic things there too, but I won't comment on it. I just did. Interestingly, they didn't know. There was what he coined a tragic obliviousness. Tragic obliviousness. Everything still looked fine and life was great, but down below it was a different story. And soon enough, the water of the lower levels began to rise to the upper deck, and eventually the Titanic broke up and it sank. And here's my point. When it comes to our journeys inward, to that inner space of our lives, that interior self, whether it is intentional or not, many of us live life oblivious as to what is happening in our interior world. It is with some degree of tragic obliviousness that can last weeks. It can last months. It can last years, and for some, it can last decades. All the while, the life you long for grows more and more distant, and you likely don't have language to explain why or know where to begin to experience the sort of wholeness that Jesus has for you. And so to extend the metaphor a bit, one of the things built in the Titanic were flood chambers. Do you remember this? So if like one chamber got flooded, you could put a gate down, and they had all this science and engineering around. Well, if the worst happens, it's thought of that it's this unsinkable ship. Well, they were incredibly wrong in that reality, as history tells us. And what happened is, as they miscalculated their effectiveness to allow certain compartments to be flooded and not deal with it, eventually it took down the entire ship. And it didn't happen over the course of a long time. It happened within 2 hours, just roughly above 2 hours. And here's something that I'm learning about us. We think that we can kind of keep our breached compartments of our interior world at bay. We feel that we can compartmentalize our pain or our shame or our hurt, the darkness, the sin, the shallow life, for a shallow life on the upper deck. We feel that we can bury our family of origin trauma. We feel that we can bury our questions about God. We feel that we can bury certain aspects of our entire personhood and who we are, and we're willing to live with breached compartments and then wondering why our life on the upper deck feels insignificant. And it doesn't actually match the life that we long for. Here's what I'm learning the more that I have conversations with fellow struggling humans, is that many of us are actually hiding in plain sight. And we're struggling in plain sight. I'm learning that there is often a hidden truth. Track with me, with no judgment in my heart. There is a hidden truth behind the lives and the images that we are carefully curating online and in front of our friends. I'm learning that just because we live in a $250,000, or in today's market, a $3.2 million house, I'm learning that just because you live in a valley house, it doesn't mean that that same home is not bankrupt on the inside of love and wholeness and peace and flourishing. And I'm learning a lot of things. But one thing that I know for certain in the midst of that is that Jesus actually wants to set you free from that. He actually wants to heal that. He actually wants to get down into those broken and flooded compartments and help you live a flourishing, happy, joyful, significant life on the upper decks, but one that is actually a reflection of a healthy life on the lower decks. He wants to stop the breach and to integrate your interior world so that you can live in freedom and healing and wholeness and transformation, but not just for you. So that you can, in your struggling next journey of a life towards Jesus, can bring so many people along that journey. And the gaps in our community, in our homes, and in our families begin to shrink up by the power of the freedom that is in Jesus. It is the lower decks of your humanity, of your interior world, where your spiritual lives truly take shape. We set one another up for failure, because we think that this is enough. And I love this, and I'm all in on this, but this, my friends, is not enough. This is the upper deck of following Jesus. And we can create a facade with amazing coffee trucks and kids and lights and singing and nice air conditioning and lobbies and pizza. We can purposely create a facade that just reinforces Christian life at the upper decks. Meanwhile, the compartments of our interior worlds are flooding, and then our community is being flooded, and we can sit back as country club Christians on the upper deck and just judge their flooding, ignore our own, and never get in the mess. So let's not trick ourselves. The journey inward is not some meditative, Buddhist, new age, it's not just this journey inward to find chi and your true self at the end of your rope. It is to find Jesus, and then it is to launch from there as you're recalibrating true self for the good of other people in love. That you would know the surpassing love of Jesus, how deep and wide it is for you, that you would know it, not just here, but with every compartment of your existence. And one of the problems is that we've set you up for failure. I think that one of the core temptations for us, for many of you in the valley, is to be tempted to believe that we can live our lives off the comfort of the upper deck, even because of the very real gifts we have, even because of the very real work ethic that you put in, even because of the very good values that we exist in the valley that have been put there, and never do the deep work of character formation, the internal level and know what it means to know God, not just experience the benefits on the upper decks. So let's avoid shallow spirituality. Let's avoid the superficial spirituality. And maybe that sounds a little harsh. Maybe it even offends you, and you're like, I'm not ready for this. When are we moving on to a new series? That's okay. It'll be September, so good luck. Maybe here's another issue, another hang-up. Do you ever find yourself putting two things opposite of one another that shouldn't be? You ever hear someone else, like in a position like mine, do that to you? Like, Matt, there's two kinds of people in the world. Those that'll talk about mental health in the church and those that just need more faith. What they need is just a deep encounter of the Spirit. We need to get the fire tunnel out. John needs to come back up. And you know what? We just need more Bible study. We need more theology on how the mind works and how it's connected to our bodies. So you know what we need? That's what we need. We need more classes. We need more Sunday school. We need more worship. We need more hands laying. And we need more caffeine underneath all of that. And or someone's like, you know what? There's sin in the camp. I think there's sin in the camp. You need to get the sin out of your heart, and maybe God could do something good with you. All right. Or have we heard over and over you just need more faith and no fear. Kick that fear down. What's that lady? The Christian aerobics lady, kick the devil back. I don't know what it is, but go YouTube it. You just need more, devil kicking aerobics. Here's my point. Stop, Matt. Edit yourself. We are prone to making the mistake that transformation can only look how we think it should look, or how we thought it used to look, or what worked for us. We think transformation has to be a process of someone else coming to us on our terms. We think that we as a church and as pastors, we're going to create a one-directional path through one small door for everyone to fit through to experience God's love and transformation. And we need to kick that door open and then set a bomb in the middle of it and create a million pathways to the same thing. And meet people where they are. Meet one another where you are. Because God right now is meeting you where you are. And every day he's meeting you where you are. And every day his arm is extended. And whether you're aware of it or not, he's right there with you. And he's just beckoning you hey, pay attention. Hey, I'm right here. I'm here. And then crisis. And then you're like, where is he? And he's like, tap you on the shoulder. He's like, bro, I was there the whole time. Or you get bored and all of a sudden you get alone to your own thoughts. You're like, oh no, I don't like my thoughts. I must distract myself more. And God's just like, hey, you, gentle, kind, loving, just come to me, be aware of me. I'm going dog. Conservative traditions of church, maybe you've experienced it. Transformation is about getting the right theology in your head, but overlooking the inner work of God in your heart. Progressive Christianity, maybe you've experienced it. Transformation is about right action and engagement within the world, but often at the expense of personal humility and mercy. Maybe you experienced this in charismatic Pentecostal traditions. Transformation is about getting the right experience at the right time with the right people, but without the deeper work of loving well and exploring their inner worlds. What if we could take the best of all of it, my friends? What if they're all a glimpse of God's beauty and how he works in different ways at different times for different people based on different needs? And just say, we humbly submit to you, God, and to one another, that we don't care how you show up in our lives. We're just willing participants in our ongoing work of transformation. And then we are willing participants in creating as many relational aspects to other people to experience the same thing. Where we quit standing on stages and saying, come here, and we say, where are you? I'm going. Belief, practice, experience, they all line up. We must press past the upper decks, the shallow formation. We got to go on the cruise ship of, this is terrible. The cruise ship of Jesus with no portholes. Get off the balconies, my friends. Get off the buffets the same no matter where you're sleeping. Hallelujah. Like we got to get past that. One where We got to get past that. We got to be something different. We got to be people where we know that there is no transformation, no wholeness without the finished work of Jesus that's empowered by the Spirit, working in tandem with our willing, wholeheartedness, participation in that process. To apprentice under Jesus in the valley and for the valley requires us, with a capital R, it requires us to embrace a fully human life, alive to every dimension of our interior worlds that are often repressed and ignored and even explained away with Bible verses in the name of respectability. We need to become, like, if any of you like to swim upstream, I'm asking you, let's swim upstream together. Any of you that are like, I love being rebellious, I am asking you for us to become like the most compassionate, charitable, loving, but rebellions the world has ever seen. Swimming upstream for the sake of people, being creative and participating with God. Rebels that are marked by truth and integrity and wholeness. I'm inviting you to start living from the lower decks. And I'm not doing it perfectly, but let's go to those decks together. Not even close. This is hard. This series is harder for me than the Sermon on the Mount. Like this, because I'm not whole. Who am I? Who am I to be like leading us in a thing of wholeness other than to say like, I'm willing to go. Can we go there together? Let's do that together. And I want to give you another image real quick. What is this image that you're familiar with? Yeah, it's like a canary in a coal mine, right? We all know the purpose of that. If it's dead, you run, you get out, right? And before advanced technology, the canary in the coal mine was like the dashboard metric that said, bad stuff is happening, you may want to run. Something is off here. But the point of the canary in the coal mine is not simply to save lives and to avoid death. It's not simply the death of the canary. It's asking a deeper question. And it's saying, why is it dead? Where is the problem coming from that's leading to this dead bird? What process was leading to that? And then fixing it. The canary in the cage metric in our world today, when it comes to our journey towards wholeness, it's found in places like the ever-increasing rates of anxiety, of depression, of suicidality, of divorce, of burnout, of busyness, of workaholism, of activity, stacked upon activity, stacked upon activity. It's found in the epidemic of loneliness and a lack of community that we are living in. It's found in almost, I could riff on this for 20 minutes, but I won't. It's found in almost the disembodied experience that our students are having existing between a world on their phones and online and a world in person with other humans. There's a lot there. It's found in the fact that 64% of the next generation is leaving the church after high school, many for religions and spirituality that is willing to go here, that is willing to say something about mental and emotional health and ending suffering. There's a universal thing underneath this. It's found in the alarming levels of violence and polarization around different solutions in our country. The list could go on and on and on, but I bring us back to this image. And I say that in a moment where the canary of Christianity seems to be repeatedly dying, I believe God is calling you and I and us together to be a different kind of follower of Jesus, a different kind of church, a church that doesn't look at the dead bird in the cage and run, but one that looks at the dead bird in the cage and goes deeper into the cave, deeper into the mind, deeper into the depths, deeper down the decks to find the gap and then close the gap for us, in us, and around us. A church marked by humble, honest, vulnerable community, slowly and integratively changing into the image of Jesus and bringing others along for the journey. And let's admit, it's way easier just to call out the dead bird. Way easier. It's way easier to do that in us and be like, that's just how it is. I'm meant to carry this. This is my burden to bear. And it may be true, but there's a next layer of that burden that maybe is true about this universal fact of, I think, how God works. That God heals you from what he heals you for. God heals you from what he heals you for. And so, many of the burdens that we're carrying are actually meant to be the source of our greatest contribution to the world. The thing that has brought you pain may be the area that you can bring the greatest contribution to the world. Maybe the life that you long for that's filled with purpose and influence and impact is meant to be lived from the very spot of the breached compartment deep down inside of you. And the invitation of Jesus is to journey inward and say, my body and my life was broken for that very thing. Not just a nice Christian life on the upper deck. That's the deepest point of the intersection of the purpose of Jesus' journey on earth and the purpose of your journey on earth. And let's be rebellions. Let's be rebels together. Let's return to our roots so that God's Spirit can bring fruit like we've never seen before. I was having breakfast with Mark Beacom this week, and we were sharing a little bit about our stories. And you should learn Mark's story. It's pretty amazing. And he's like, what's your story? It's like, I've known you your whole life. I've seen things, but like, what's going on? And like, how did that work for you? And I began to tell him my story. And the shortest way I know how to explain it to you is I legitimately was blessed with about as good of a childhood and Christian and church experience as I know could have existed for me. Loving family, consistent parenting. The love was never a question. Jesus was never in question. It was like the center of our gravity for life was these deeper questions. And it's big, but the older I got, the more that there's a flip side to that blessing. Because it became so easy to measure my life with God just by my ability to blend into the Christian, consistent way of life that I was actually blessed with as a gift from God. And so I had a lot of belief here. I had a lot of passion even to do the right things and to make my life matter. But underneath that was a lot of upper deck living. It was a lot of upper deck living, maybe exclusively. Underneath that was a lot of knowing about who God is and how we should be and what life could be, but there wasn't a lot of like me knowing God. Does that make sense? And let me explain it another way. We recently put some houseplants in our house for the first time, real ones. It's a journey, my friends. And it's been about a month, and they're not dead yet. So, like, praise him. But as a lifelong fake plant owner, I'm learning some things about this. Because fake plants, compared to a real plant, one of those never dies, and it has no risk of death, but it's actually never been alive. A fake plant is consistent. It looks the same. You can count on it. You may have to dust off the exterior every now and then. But at its core, it's actually lifeless. And the root system is non-existent because there's no life coming from it. It never grows up to contribute anything because it's not alive. It doesn't reproduce and multiply because it's not alive. But a real plant, on the other hand, with just some intentionality and some nurturing and lots of effort, the possibilities are endless. It's actually contributing something to our home as it oxygenates the air, if that's the right word. Growth is possible. At some point, the container that it lives in will have to get bigger. Its capacity will increase. And the best part is that plant can bring more plants and multiply and reproduce, bringing generations of plants to fill our whole house for kingdom come. And all of us, I think, want an awareness of God, right? But we need also an awareness of ourselves. If I were to flip that, most of us, I think, are fighting for an awareness of ourselves in the midst of an awareness of God. Deep down, we're fighting and clawing and experimenting and searching for who we are, but sometimes we're doing that without an awareness of God. And neither fully work. And if you're to take those three images, I would ask 3 questions. If you could map your life on the deck of where you're living, from the most interior core essence of who you are to the upper deck, where would you index where you're living your life? The second, could you name the canaries in your life that are serving as alarm bells to the breaches that may be having underneath the surface? And 3, are you settling for a life that looks like a real plant, but in fact has no root system and is compromising itself for a lifeless, consistent life that just blends in with everything else? Psychologists talk about what they call a lived spirituality versus a stated spirituality. My lived spirituality versus stated spirituality was an immense gap that I am in the process of growing closer and closer. Boredom has a way of doing it. Crisis has a way of closing that gap. For me, it was crisis. And as I shift to kind of wrap it up today, I want to acknowledge that I know that this journey inward towards wholeness, like as you think about this, assuming you're like, yeah, I think there's something here for me. I know that can bring a lot of fears. And you may carry like religious or even generational dynamics where this whole enterprise feels very new age or just soft, like just soft, like, come on. Or maybe self-centered even. Now, you may fear what you will uncover. You may fear what opening that closed door will show to you and what it will feel like. You may fear despair. You may also fear that your entire way of life, the life at the upper deck or the next upper deck or wherever that is for you, which seems pretty great, is going to collapse. The facade will be over. You may even have put in the effort through the years to like carefully construct some flood chambers, and you're doing okay with it. And what seems like maybe a better option doesn't seem worth the effort. But that original question of what is the sort of life that you long for, it is found in this journey. A life of wholeness and healing, but a life that has purpose. A life that is transformed and being transformed and is helping others go on that journey is found right here. What if it was possible for you to learn how to love in such a way that it heals? What if the pain that you carry didn't have to have the last word? What if you could actually experience a life with God, knowing God in a way that you didn't think was possible for you? That was for other people. What if you could feel less lonely and isolated, maybe even with those that are closest to you who have no idea of what's happening beneath the surface? What if you could live as your truest self as given by Jesus? And what if you could take all of that, everything that is you, from the most broken to the most beautiful, and wrap it up as a gift to the world with your life every day? I think there's something on the other side of this for each one of us. And so I'll land here, and it's something I referenced before, but it is too good not to close this introductory week with. There's an ancient form of Japanese art called kintsugi, in which only 2 materials are used. There's a broken piece of pottery, or broken pieces of pottery, damaged pieces of pottery, and there is gold. Kintsugi is a form of art where you take something that is broken and you make it whole again by pouring gold into all of the cracks. The Japanese artists who started this believed that when something suffered damage, it carries a history and story that makes it more beautiful than if it had never been damaged in the first place. So they take broken things from the past and they make them more beautiful than they were before they were broken. And listen, that is the kind of artist that God is. He's one who picks up our broken pieces, the mess we've made out of the lies we've believed, and makes something beautiful out of our brokenness. He pours gold into every crack and he makes us whole. And now most people just throw out a broken vase, but these artists actually see broken pieces as treasure. And they meticulously collect every last piece. The ugliest parts of ourselves, the parts we want to throw out, God sees as redeemable, and he does his best work in the mess. He's that kind of artist. Let me give you some hope today as we end this, that for each one of us, regardless of how you esteem someone versus another, or compare yourself to someone in their journey, God only works with broken vessels. And when you reflect on that as an idea, when you believe it up here, it's poetic and it's beautiful. But when you experience that personally, when you know the love that surpasses knowledge, it is far more than poetry. It's transformation. And the great temptation of your apprenticeship is to assume that you are going to be the first person who's able to do it up and to the right. The invitation of the spiritual life that we are after in the interior world of each one of us, down on those lower decks, is that you too might one day have a legacy that is simply marked by God's grace and God's love, operating in you and through you. It's to know that God is a good enough artist and that the redemption runs deep enough and broad enough to repurpose the moments of your story that you prefer to edit or erase altogether. The ones that sting to even think about, the utter failures, and turn them into moments that most completely reveal his grace, his love, and most profoundly reveal his kingdom. After 41 weeks of journeying through the Sermon on the Mount together we don't need more insights. We don't need more knowledge. We don't need more marching orders. And probably for most of us, we don't even need that much more, if any, belief. The most urgent need of our lives together is to trust what we say we believe. That in that trust and the embodiment of what God wants to do, that he will, as an artist with the power to do it, will paint a new story with their life by filling in the cracks with something far more valuable than you could ever imagine. That's our heart. That's the journey that is in front of us for each and every one of us. Will we go there together? Prompting one another, loving one another, leaning in together, and recognizing that it's going to look different for every single person. That's what's in front of us. And so would you stand?